At a time we are dealing with numerous challenges in our nation, from the killings of young persons to the economic turmoil that we are facing, to numerous and various problems that the nation Kenya faces, I am here to give you unfiltered insight into these issues, one by one, as we delve into the details of these occurrences. My name is Chris Kushu, and this is my unfiltered insights. The president has been going around the country speaking of how he will transform the nation from a third world country into the African Singapore. To understand exactly how Singapore moved from a third world country or a developing country to a first world country in 20 to 25 years, we must look at the factors that contributed to this immense growth within a single generation. The first thing Singapore did, it fixed its education system. The education system that was there was churning out labor-intensive labor force. And whatever was there in Singapore was labor-intensive industries. They shifted that education policy and empowered technical education in Singapore. They ensured that the workers who were being produced by their education system were highly skilled, and the government saw to it and ensured that every Singaporean had an opportunity to go to school and get high-skilled training. This created a labor market that was skill-intensive. From there, they needed companies that could employ these highly skilled workers. They made economical decisions that contributed to the growth of their country within a very short period of time. They ensured that the policies they were making were pro-business and were growing Singapore towards a free market by the year 2000. And actually, the laws they made welcomed companies and industries that required highly skilled labor in tech and other fields as well. These industries poured themselves into Singapore because the taxation regime was predictable, the policy making was predictable, the political stability that was existent in Singapore at that particular time after all these changes had begun being made welcomed these companies. They heavily invested in Singapore and now employed the highly skilled workers who are being churned out from the education system of Singapore. Unemployment went lower than ever before, thereby raising the standards of living in Singapore. From there, Singapore fixed its governance, and key among the issues that it fixed to ensure that the country was running smoothly and they were on track to move from a developing country to a first world country, they eliminated corruption. Corruption was heavily punished, including death for being involved in corruption. This solved a major problem in Singapore. And those were just but many of the steps that Singapore took, including housing. Singapore was one big slum. The government turned the country into one big construction site. And now, since they had eliminated corruption to very negligible levels, the projects could go on without wastage of public funds. The project of affordable housing was implemented. High-end houses, and people were now forcefully moved from the slums to these houses. They were being assigned by the government and assisted by the private sector for the citizens to acquire these houses easily. And by the word affordable, it was actually affordable to the lowest of the persons in Singapore. And thus began the journey to eliminate the slums in Singapore. The standards of living upgraded. since now people who are in high-skilled jobs in the industries created by the pro-business policies that were made by the government of Singapore. Unemployment being very, very low, the middle class surged. The money flow surged. And because they were highly paid for their skills, their good skills which were valued by the industries, families began uplifting. And the government had now fixed the housing issue. So now the major problems in the country had disappeared. The government built on that up till 2000, when now Singapore was moved from a developing country to a first world country. But this took firm leadership, this took corruption elimination, this took severe measures against those who were plundering resources of the country, and this took a bold step from bold leaders who understood that it needed a person with that iron steel in them to govern Singapore in the right direction with the interest of the nation at heart. Lee Kuan Yew was that man that Singapore needed for the final push and for the building of that nation to become a first world country. Building it and progressing it towards a first world country was the first step. Making systems and policies that ensured it remained a first world country was another difficult job, but they pulled it off because their governance was fixed, their politics was fixed, and their housing was fixed, their market was fixed. Everything was working seamlessly, and systems were in place to ensure that Singapore remains a first world country. Let's come back to Kenya, the country where our president is telling us at least by the end of his tenure in 2032, Kenya will be Singapore. And he will have transformed Kenya from a third world country to a first world country. I call this a mirage. And I call this daydreaming that cannot be fulfilled. Reason being, our politics are rotten. Our society in Kenya is rotten at large. Tribalism thrives openly. Our systems of governance are not working as efficient as they should. We came up with structures like counties to ensure that development got to the very grassroots where the common mwananchi resides. But it appears we devolved corruption and wastage of public funds. Kenya cannot become the Singapore of Africa when our education system is highly underfunded. Kenya cannot become the Singapore of Africa while capitation to schools to ensure that education is affordable and is churning out highly skilled workers is at its lowest. Kenya cannot move to become a Singapore of Africa if the very institutions that are supposed to safeguard the interests of the nation, our investigative agencies, our security agencies, our judiciary, if those systems are not fixed, if they are not working optimally, we cannot have Kenya become the Singapore of Africa. Right now, we have had lots of companies, over 30 manufacturers since 2022 to 2025, since 2013 to 2025, have actually left the country. And one of the reasons they cite is a hostile business environment, which is brought about by hostile policies enacted by the government. Another major issue that has made over 30 manufacturers leave Kenya is because the taxation regime of Kenya is totally and completely unpredictable and so burdensome to these companies that their profit margins shrink. And as we all know, business is a matter of making profit. You cannot operate in an environment where you are not making enough profit, where the government stifles you, where there is massive corruption. There is a time Qatar Airways wanted to construct a second runway at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. And the deal was so sweet to the country that it would have transformed Nairobi into a traveling hub of Africa, handling millions of passengers, because they were to do a brand new airport, they were to do another runway, rehabilitate the current one at a lower cost than what Adani was offering us. And they were only to run it for 25 years. And majority of the part that they were running was the second runway and part of the new airport. But what happened is that the very corruption that has hindered development in this country reared its ugly head. And Qatar Airways walked away, went to Rwanda, gave a better deal, and they are now constructing a multi-million traveling hub, a modern airport to be envied in Rwanda, a country smaller than some of the counties in Kenya. Simply because where they went to, there was no corruption, or the corruption levels were negligible. With the corruption that thrives in this nation, with a country that loses 3 billion shillings every day to corruption as per the government sources, we cannot become a Singapore in 10 to 15 to 20 or even 50 years. We will only become the Singapore of Africa is if we fix our politics, if we fix our governance, if we fix our business policies and the laws being made by Parliament concerning the business environment. We will become a Singapore if Chapter 6 of the Constitution of Kenya is implemented. We will become a Singapore the day we learn to hold free, fair, and verifiable elections without any sort of violence. We will become the Singapore of Africa if we deal with the morality of our society. We will become the Singapore of Africa if tribalism stops being one of the major foundations that we rely on while making political decisions. We will become the Singapore of Africa if the matter of having kingmakers and having leaders of regions as per our tribes and our communities is eliminated. The day we fix our governance issues, the day we fix our corruption issues, the day we fix our business laws is the day Kenya begins its journey to become the Singapore of Africa. Otherwise, it is just but a promise and a mirage that is far-fetched that we may never see in our lifetime. That is my unfiltered insight.